Hello, my name is Donny McNichol of Team Animation. I'd like to talk to you about project leadership style. In particular, what the challenges of being a project leader, what's your particular and unique style, and also how you can modify and adapt it in different situations. Project leaders have got a very challenging role. They need to understand organisational models and cultures that underlie them. They've got to understand the complex nature of success. They need to focus on understanding in a business context. They need to understand the expectations of those involved. They've got to drive what is underlying problems. They need to sell the vision to stakeholders and groups. They need to recognise, value and marshal all sorts of subjective views. And they need to translate the political into a reality. Often they've got to take a political desire to do something and turn that into a project. They've also got to influence people, often without any form of power. They need to lead teams to become greater than the sum of their parts. Very few projects have got all the resources they need to do them. So you need to think about how do we get the absolute best out of people. They have to deal with high levels of uncertainty, often relentless change that's going on, and they need to accept and work with inevitable resistance to change as well. They ultimately need to constantly model what they say in terms of the behaviours they exhibit, because often as a figurehead, people are looking towards them. So it is a big challenge, and understanding your leadership style is very important for someone to know, is that the right style at the right time? So just looking at this visual here, putting the project manager at the start, let's say project manager, project leader, that people do things very differently. We are unique. Now, we use a model to help identify what some of those distinctions are between people, which in turn allows us to then identify what project leadership style is. So if you look at those four cross sections of a tree, externally they would all look very different, but internally they all look very different as well. So we use a very simple tool called AIMA to help to identify initially someone's communication engagement style, and then ultimately what their associated leadership style is. Now, AIMA will not answer everything. It is just a simple tool, but it does give you some idea about your communication engagement. And I'm not going to go through in any detail about AIMA because there is a separate video about improving your communication style that goes through it in detail. But it's a colour-based model, and it talks about high colours, high red, high blue, high green, because it's about a predominance of or preference for. It's very effective and it's quick. And it's 10 questions and you can do it in 3 minutes. It's very easy to do this. And we use it again in multiple ways to obtain understanding of each of the different layers between understanding self, relationship, teams and so on. So those are the four colours. Again, I'm not going to go into them in any detail. You can look at this at your leisure, but you come up with four communication and engagement styles, each of them relatively unique. Now, what we've done is then built on top of that and identified leadership styles, because for each of those they have got their own unique way of leading on project, leading generally, but in particular leading in projects. So I'm going to go through some of these. So these are some of the simple descriptions we have. So a high green, their preference, their style broadly is a bit delegating. It's low supportive and low directive. They expect people to get on with things. They're not going to direct, they're not going to provide a huge amount of support. They rely on thinking, so they spend their time thinking and analysing, and they have the control, if you will, through preparation. They prepare, they structure and get things ready. So that's a broad description of their style. The high blue is different style again. Their fundamental is about participating, assisting, helping the individual. So it's high supportive, but they're not necessarily going to be highly directive. They rely on one-to-one relationships for success, and they have their control through supporting others. They control through support. The high red is then about, their style is broadly about telling. So it's low support, but they provide high level of direction. And they'll rely on authority to get things done. And they get the control through the authority that they have. And the high yellow is very much about selling ideas and thoughts to try and get their to move things forward. That's their kind of broad leadership style. So it's highly supportive and often highly directive as well. So they'll support, but they'll also direct at the same time. And they rely on influencing others. and the sort of control comes from that as well. So overall, you can see the 4 colours and the 4 broad leadership styles that are associated with them. Now, the reason we like this model is it is a leadership model that you can get simply by completing the IMA profile, which there'll be a link to at the end. So it's a very quick way of talking to people about what their leadership style is. Now, just diving into detail for one of the particular colour styles. Leadership, we would suggest, is broadly about 3 things. It's about providing, as you can see here, vision and direction. It's also about building relationships, and then it's about delivering something. So if you can create a future point, a description of what the future looks like, the vision, what it is we want to achieve, build the relationships to get you to, for people to want to follow you towards that, and then actually ensure that you deliver, then those are 3 broadly different characteristics about leadership. So for a high red, so that's just going back to take one example, high red focuses on defining the vision, controlling the environment to achieve it. Typically, with their vision would be quite short, to the point, clearly defined targets, and they'd be very clear about the tracking of it. Tend to be very great starters, initiating projects and focusing on the big picture and the bottom line at the same time. But they don't want necessarily for things to get too routine, or they may even start something new, so they might get distracted because they like that constant delivery and looking forward to getting things done. The other second element is around relationships. So the priority is task and achieving the end results. It's not necessarily about relationships. And they want others to be competent and focused on doing what is necessary to achieve the vision. And the last bit is about delivery. Well, high reds focuses on clarity of responsibility and achieving on targets. Their approach to delivery would be minimum level of control and expectation, but they would give a lot of direction. They'd be very happy to be in a very continuous basis, providing a direction, what we should be doing, and also about decision making. And they are convergent thinkers. That takes the information and decisions things once, preferring linear conversations about where are we going from one to the other. And they can be seen, they can be set in stone in their opinions, can be organised, stubborn, possibly even inflexible. Like all of the colours, they have got their strengths, but they've got their areas for development as well. So just want to now talk to you about how the style gets modified. Well, actually you should think about, in each of the different situations, the other person. On the previous video about communication styles, it talks about how you should modify your approach to suit the other person's communication style. And you can watch that video and hear about that. But this is now talking about the leadership style that you should be adopting. We've broken into 2 axes, so the level of direction that's required by someone or a team from low to high, and the level of support that's required from low to high. So this is thinking about an individual or a team as to what their needs are, and therefore you as the project leader thinking, how do you need to modify your approach to support them? So if you think of an example of the person there in black, the capable, experienced, confident and committed to the goals, team member, so on, the high green might be the kind of, if you will, the ideal project leader, as they would provide a low level of support and direction, and the person, because they're capable and experienced, they would get on with the job. So, but for someone who needs a high level of support and a low level of direction, so they might be capable and experienced, but just lack the confidence or commitment, a high blue type of style could be ideal. So the project leader provides a low level of direction, a high level of support. Again, high blue, typically that would be their style, would map into there. For a high, here we've got somebody who maybe lacks the ability to do it, but they've got the lack of experience, but it's enthusiastic for the work. So they don't need support, they just necessarily need some direction. And their high red type of project leadership style could be absolutely ideal for that, because they will provide a high level of direction, but not necessarily a high level of support. And finally, where somebody is lacking experience or skill and may also lack willingness, so they've got a need for a high level of support and a high level of direction, typically a high yellow type of style may be just what's required, because they will provide that high level of direction and support. Now, what we're actually saying is, if you think about each of those four, you as a project leader will be in one of those particular boxes. You will have your natural style. So if you are a high yellow, for example, but the person needs a low level of support and a low level of direction, you need to think about, do I modify my style to suit with somebody who's diametrically, so in the top left quadrant, but I'm naturally in the bottom right? Now, you may recognize this model actually, because it's a kind of an enhancement or move on from the situational leadership model, Hersey and Blanchard. Because the Hersey and Blanchard model fits into this, if you can imagine, kind of 90 degrees to the side. But it's the same structure. We would say that you should use this in a slightly different way, in that you are where you are. When you identify where the individual sits, you should be thinking about, should I modify my leadership style to fit with their particular need? I wouldn't suggest it's necessarily about going from bottom left to bottom right to top left, which in some ways is what the situational leadership model says. You go from the kind of typically the low support, high level of direction, then high level of support, high level of direction, then up to the high level of support but low level of direction, and end up at low level of support, low level of direction. And I've seen it conveyed that that is the way to manage it. I wouldn't necessarily suggest that that's a great way of doing it, because every individual and every team's needs are different. So I think this is a very good way, using the IMA model, using this IMA project leadership model, to think about what style is applicable for the individual of the team. So now just want to finish about what are the other factors. That was one big reason, big issue about how you'd want to modify your approach to fit particular needs. There are other things as well, and you can see we've identified 8 other aspects on here. And I'll just briefly describe what those 8 are. This is actually being included in a white paper for the government, this model. So it may, if you do see that, it may look a little different. So it could be that the project purpose and success criteria require you to modify your project style somewhat, because because of what it's trying to achieve, your style needs to suit the project to try and achieve it. It could be the organizational culture. Your style does not typically fit with that culture or that organization. You need to think about, do you modify it? Your development approach. If you take an example, Agile does require certain ways of behaving and acting to make it work effectively. And there are certain leadership styles that aren't naturally comfortable with constantly modifying, constantly changing, constantly bringing people together, not that long-term, clear, defined way of working. So different style, you may have to think about, I need to modify my style to do that. The project management methodology could be exceptionally bureaucratic, structured, very stepped. That may not be the style that you like adopting. So you may to think, is that a challenge for, do I need to modify my style to suit? The other one's multicultural aspects. If you're working with people from other cultures, which I'm sure many of you will have, you need to think about, does the style fit for those people that you're working as part of the team or those stakeholders? The team location, if you think about it, all people are now working in teams all across the world, virtual teams, so you need to think about, your style may work exceptionally well when you're working in one floor in a building, but does that style work when you're working for a virtual team across the globe where you never get face-to-face with people? As an example, maybe High Blue, who is used very much about building those one-to-one relationships, and finds it very difficult when people are virtual teams all around the world. The project shape, and we'll talk about this, I will talk about this in a separate video, about the shape of the project. There could be a project with a high, pace is extremely high, complexity high, novelty is high, and so on. And those things could mean that your style needs to adapt. If the pace is extremely high of the project, running very quickly, it may require a certain approach to the leadership of it, rather than a very laid back, slow, defined time that's required to maybe make decisions. You need to react very quickly, so you need to think about that style. And the last one is the external environment. There could be things happening in the outside world around your project that influence it. the high levels of risk and so on, where you need to modify your style. So I've just wanted to go through and identify some of the many factors. Not for a moment are we saying all of these factors are important, even what we've mentioned earlier about your leadership style with individuals. But there may be one of these things, as you look at it, you think that could be the thing. Maybe a tweak or adjustment in my style, how I'm approaching people could make all the difference on the project. So just to finish up on here, if you are interested in understanding your IMA project leadership style, as a starting point, if you complete the diagnostic, the link is here, then that's a starting point, and then we'll be developing more material as we go along about the project leadership style, but hopefully what we've presented here will give you some real insights. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for watching.